Apparently I'm recording. Hello, I'm GC McKay, and today I want to have a little chat about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, as nobody seems to know. I mean, I don't really know even where to start with this book. It's one of my favourites, and it has been for a number of years. I've seen numerous interpretations of it before actually reading the book, and I actually don't think that spoils anything. This piece has influenced so much since its first publication in 1818, which I will repeat, 1818. That's over 200 years ago now. I think it's more relevant today than it ever has been in some respects. And literally, I don't even know where to start with it. I suppose in this review, there's some things I'm going to ignore, mainly for convenience, but I suppose I want to focus more on the kind of modern and contemporary kind of comparisons or leanings that I think it has still. And if you want to read more about the mythology or the liturgical kind of points and imageries and symbolism that it uses, which is abundant to say the least throughout the whole piece. I mean, there's a reason it had a subtitle of All the Modern, All the Modern Prometheus. So if you want to learn more about that, then watch another video or go and read up on it, because my main aim with this is to kind of discuss the existential side of it all, actually, which I do think is slightly underappreciated. I haven't actually read much about that in the past or ever, really. And for me, it really is an existential horror masterpiece, because the main questions it really asks of existence and of creating a living, sentient being are so profound and so, I would say, equal in a sense. Like, there's no one or the other throughout the whole thing. It's much more focused on the horror and of the beauty of it at the same time, and it questions it, and it really puts a kind of a statement out there, I would say, that we do create our own monsters. So I suppose from last week, after doing, a piece on Jeffrey Dahmer, who by all accounts was definitely a monster of sorts, I felt Frankenstein was an appropriate follow-up. But at the same time, I've been thinking about reviewing this for fucking ages, actually. I was going to be a bit lame and put it out during Halloween, but I kind of think that would actually undermine how good this piece is. But instead of really talking about the kind of plot, which is kind of told in a series of letters for the major part, which is very popular around that era, Shelley's kind of reaction to the literary themes of the time, which was romanticism, are definitely included in this piece, but it also stretches out into kind of gothic literature and horror, mixing it with science fiction, which has had so much influence, it's impossible to even list them all here, I would say. It's a fucking masterpiece, I would say, and not because it's perfectly written, but more because of the ideas that it expresses. And I do find it interesting that she originally got the idea from a dream. I will be mentioning some of her personal life as well, which I don't normally like to do, but in terms of writing what you know, Mary Shelley is a perfect example of why you should do that. She was writing this piece, as some of you may know, and finished it, I believe, around the age of 19, although there is some kind of, discussion around that, how old she really was. Some people think she started it at 16. Didn't finish it till 19. It wasn't published until she was 21. So, you know, and I think that was under a pseudonym anyway, so who knows the real kind of history. But we do know that she was fucking young, and she'd already lost a child by this time. Infant deaths and children dying before they grew up was obviously very common back in that time, in the very early 19th century. But she lost 3 out of 4 during her lifetime, and she also lost her own mother because of complications during childbirth. I think she was 10 days old or something when her own mother died. Her sister, who was a half-sister, who was an illegitimate child of her father's, actually killed herself as well. So death was a very prominent part of her life. And during these dreams, which I believe she was having about the baby she lost, she also had one about a creature or a certain type of monster that appeared as a kind of corpse, but then it became animated, and that kind of horror that was arisen from that actually woke her from her dream. And when you actually read this book as well, which has been noted by other scholars, and literary critics, there is a very almost subconscious or unconscious feeling to this book. And I think that's actually to its credit a lot of the time as well, because the idea is completely ludicrous. I mean, it really takes the piss, essentially, of what you can really do with science fiction. But also the whole notion of, you know, piecing together bits of a cadaver and then using electricity to bring it back to life. Some scientists of the time did actually speculate that that might be possible. And some also think that Frankenstein himself was actually named after Benjamin Franklin, which I can definitely see some kind of correlation there, but it's only trivia, so I'm not really going to go on about that. And yeah, I just think there is a definite kind of element of a dream, or a dream within a dream, throughout this whole thing. And because it is a kind of story within a story within a story as well, I think that also lends a lot to this idea that of this kind of sequence of events, and the kind of the truth behind each voice is definitely questionable, and how complicated truth becomes because of different perspectives and different memories and different blah blah blah. You just get a really beautifully crafted piece overall. Throughout history, and especially today, I mean, a lot of you out there will probably think that Frankenstein is the monster. He's not. The monster is just the Dr. Frankenstein's creation. And I do find that interesting, actually, because of, you know, history. And I actually think it's quite a beautiful irony that most people do actually think Frankenstein is the Frankenstein we're all accustomed to seeing. Because really, the main monster of this story is Dr. Frankenstein. So for the fact that his name gets remembered as the monster and kind of gets pushed onto his creation is kind of deliciously ironic in a lot of regards, because some may argue that he isn't, but for me, he is definitely the monster of this tale. He is the antagonist. He is the evil side of this book. And that isn't because of his creation necessarily. You can also tie in a lot of ideas about God and how the monster views Frankenstein as his god, but also his devil at the same time. But I would say it's a lot about parenting as well throughout this, and about becoming a parent, about being one, and the responsibilities that come with that. And when those responsibilities are neglected and completely abandoned, then the monster that is created because of that is essentially the creator's or parents' fault, which I don't think is said enough, actually, in a lot of regards. And it is subtle in the way it's portrayed here. Also, as well, the fact that the mother figures throughout the whole piece are just basically absent, I think speaks volumes about Mary Shelley's own feelings about her upbringing, and about what that does to men who have to try and raise children without their mother as well. so Dr. Frankenstein gets his opportunity to actually be mother and father, and he basically doesn't do either of them. As soon as Frankenstein is awoken and brought to life, there's this kind of beautiful scene where, yes, he's hideous. He has yellow eyes. I mean, he's made up of a corpse, so he's got decayed skin, and he's basically in a state of, I don't know, perpetual capitulation, I suppose, or complete deterioration. So he's just, and he looks at Dr. Frankenstein and he grins. And the way it's written from the perspective of Dr. Frankenstein, you already start to question his perspective of it, because he's horrified by what he's created like that. It's like as soon as it becomes alive, he comes to the kind of horrific realization of what he's created, and he's disgusted by it and ashamed, and he's in a kind of state of impotence in a way. He kind of just looks at it in shock, whereas the monster itself is actually just kind of baby-like in it, the way it reacts to the world. And it's through this kind of childish wonder, you kind of instantly sympathize with him, but at the same time you're made to have kind of conflicting feelings about it because of Dr. Frankenstein's reaction and how appalled he is. He runs off on him as well straight away, no fucking about. He doesn't try and like get used to the presence of this gigantic monstrosity at all. He just vacates the premises, gets the fuck out of there, and then Frankenstein eventually ends up in a woods kind of area where he kind of, that's where his infancy is, basically. That's where he grows up, in essence. And he does discover a household that he wants to belong to. He kind of watches them from the distance. I think he shacks himself up in some sort of hut, if memory serves, something that's kind of out of the way, but is kind of used, but he can kind of hide there and just kind of watch this family. And he manages to get himself a couple of books to read, so he kind of self-educates himself. And one of the books, actually, funnily enough, is The Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe, which I've reviewed before. And again, that is a kind of criticism of the Romantic period via the romantic device that Goethe employs throughout the novel. And doing that, he's kind of lending a criticism of it. And also Dante is in there. So Frankenstein, already we get another nod to the kind of mythology element of the story and of how that shapes him as a person and how he thinks. I don't want to give too much away about the plot, because I'm betting quite a few of you out there haven't read it, and just read it. That's all I can really say upon the matter. My other point, I suppose, is the psychological element of it. I think this is so far ahead of its time, it's actually kind of intimidating in some ways, because the element of existential horror, I would say, throughout it is so palpable. And I don't think there's any one of us out there that hasn't questioned why we've been brought into existence at some point. And the fact that our parents do that and there's no real answer, you kind of stumped just by the question itself. And for someone like the monster that Frankenstein creates, what that must have been like, I think it's easy to empathize with, because I do think all of us kind of think that at some point. We kind of just go, why am I here? Oh, I'm here because you decided to bring me here, or you too. But that's all you got for me, isn't it, really? There's nothing else. So the fact that Frankenstein has to kind of live, again, I'm saying Frankenstein's monster has to live on his own. And there's a lot of comparisons to kind of Adam and Eve, although obviously he doesn't have an Eve. He wants one at some point in the novel. But he also, that would make his creator his god. So Frankenstein serves as kind of a god figure, and his monster sees himself as Adam quite frequently. I mean, obviously from what he reads as well, that actually contributes towards his personality and his thought process and everything. And so he's constantly in a state of turmoil, really, and the kind of isolation and turmoil that he suffers actually does somewhat justify his actions throughout the piece. As I've mentioned, that Mary Shelley's own life was surrounded by death. It's not it's not surprising, shall we say, that Frankenstein the novel it's fucking full of it, basically. Death is around every corner of this book. It's just prominent throughout, and the whole idea of life versus death, or life and death, and how they're connected and how they operate within our own dreams and reality, and just it's always there. It's prominent throughout the whole novel, and yeah, that's kind of what goes down to nearly every character in it, depending on your interpretation. And I think that's about all I have to say about it at the moment. I might review it again at some point after I've reread it a few times, because there's just so much you can say about it. I mean, it's got psychological elements, it's got philosophical elements, it's got existential elements, it's got everything from mythology to religious connotations to just chock-a-block. And the fact that she was 19, give or take, when she completed it, is so admirable, and the hubris it must have taken to just write this piece. And also, as a final point, you can definitely detect the kind of weariness of actually creating the novel itself from Shelley. So we've already got this kind of element of the creator and his creation and the kind of connotations that come with that. But that's also kind of mirrored by the author and her creation of the book itself. So there is a real turmoil throughout, and you can definitely sense a kind of agitation and trepidation, I would say, within the piece, which makes it so delicate at times that it's just beautiful. And I can't help but almost love, or I would say there's a certain element of love for the monster of Frankenstein, because certain pieces or certain passages will speak about how he's just woken up inside a forest and he's just kind of admiring everything and listening to the sounds of the birds. And there's this such a youth-like quality to the way he thinks, especially at the beginning, that you're kind of just, you want to befriend him, you want to look after him, you want to be there for him, essentially. And the fact that his own creator has completely abandoned him and basically doesn't take any responsibility for what he's done either. He can admit the fact that he built this monster, but he can't take the fucking responsibility to actually look after it. And I do think there is a real commentary there in a kind of Freudian sense that starts to come out. And again, that's how far ahead of its time it is. I mean, it's mental. It came out 96 years before the First World War started, which is just incredible to me, really. And that's all I have to say on it at this moment in time. I'm sure I've missed stuff out that I'm going to be pissed off about. My own novel, actually, of Fubar, does contain a lot of references to Frankenstein, or at least a few. I know in one particular line, I was definitely making a homage to it. And I think it probably comes out in a lot of stuff I write, really, without even me knowing it at times. And it's definitely, you can really see it if you read some Poe and if you read Kafka as well. Is the comparisons are not only legitimate, but also obvious, actually, when you really, hold them together. But for me, it's probably the best horror novel ever written. I can't really compare it to much else. I just think it's so, and like today as well, with the rise of the robots, or whatever you want to call it, or with the kind of idea of sentient AI, it's more relevant in some regards, or in that respect, is like, yes, we might have the intellectual superiority or freedom to create a form of life, but does that mean we have the kind of wisdom or morality to do so? should, you know, that question is surely more important than the actual achievement in some ways, which I actually think we get the wrong way around a lot of the time. We kind of just create it and then see what happens. Whereas really, if we're supposed to be responsible for what we create, which I do think is a massive message in this book, then that question should always come first, which it should come first for a lot of parents out there as well, I would say. And for anything that you create, there is a responsibility there. And it's more the fact that it's out of your hands as well after a certain period of time. And if you don't take the right action, or at least attempt to take the right action, then you are a contributor to the evil and potential sorrow that that may create in the future. So on that positive note, I'm going to leave. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know your thoughts on it, actually, because this book's just it's too good. So yeah, let me know what you think. I'll see you next week. Thank you very much for watching. I've been GC McKay. Go buy my fucking books if you want. There's links in the description below and all of that crap. And yeah, I suppose I'll let you know. I'm actually chugging along quite well with my current piece. I'm not going to mention what it is yet because I'm still in the kind of first draft stage. It's taken me a long time to build up the courage to actually write something again, because it really took a lot out of me doing the last one. So, but now I'm actually thinking I'm going to be releasing a lot more and more frequently. And yeah, I'm just putting it out there to be held responsible for it, I suppose, in the upcoming months. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye.